All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Hokyoji's Sunday Dharma Talk. This is the first one of the new year, 2026, which always sounds so much like the future to me. I always thought like things would be really different by the time we got to 2026, maybe because of watching the Jetsons or something. And I'm always disappointed that it's not. It's like, things are mostly the same. I think things have been the same at least since the 90s. I am the speaker this morning, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. The title of my talk this morning is We Cannot Cover the Earth in Leather, so what can we do? And it's funny, actually, I was talking to Rushin a couple days ago, last week, and I was telling him that this old quote came back into my head about covering the earth in leather. And it's one I really like, and it's actually one from my time in the Tibetan tradition. And it comes out of the Bodhikari Avatara. So I want to back up a little bit and say a little bit about the Bodhikari Avatara. So that's normally translated as the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. It is attributed to Shantideva, whose dates are about 685 to 763 CE, so in the Common Era. He was an Indian Buddhist monk at Nalanda University, and it was composed during the late Pala period, and it pretty much was taken as representing the culmination of Indian Mahayana philosophy. It's 700 verses organized into 10 chapters, so you can do the math. Each one's about 70 verses. And sometimes the translations are slightly different. There's 9. It was preserved through both Sanskrit manuscripts and Tibetan translations, and it's foundational to Tibetan Buddhist monasticism. So in the Tibetan Buddhist schools called Shedras, the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life is studied intensely. The basic format of it is the basic format for many of the tantric practices. The actual chanting has this pattern to it, about which I will talk. And it's been talked about a lot in modern Western Buddhism, especially through people like Stephen Batchelor, the Padmakara Translation Group, and is taught a lot by the Dalai Lama. The fun thing is, according to tradition, Shantideva appeared to be a lazy and unaccomplished monk by his peers. And when they challenged him to demonstrate his learning, he is said to have delivered the text extemporaneously. So he just sat there and started reciting it out. And as he did so, as he finished, he ascended into the air and disappeared, and the final words rang out with nobody there. So that's a pretty baller move if somebody's going to accuse you of being unaccomplished and lazy. It's like, here, hold my beer, or whatever the monks had. As I said, there are 9 chapters, or 10 chapters, depending on the translation. The first one, and we don't really have this distinction in Zen Buddhism. It's very strong in late Indian Buddhism and then in Tibetan Buddhism, where there are 2 forms of bodhicitta, 2 forms of the awakened mind. The first one is the aspiration to awaken for the benefit of all beings. So in the first chapter, Shantideva talks about the benefits of developing bodhicitta. And then, and this happens again in the sadhana. So when you do a sadhana practice, you will chant things that are basically saying, I aspire to awaken for the benefit of all beings. And chapter 2 is something we are familiar with, which is the confession of faults. So all my ancient twisted karma type of stuff. And then chapter 3 goes into full, what we would call absolute bodhicitta. which is the formal commitment of the bodhisattva intention to realize enlightenment for the sake of all beings. And then it basically starts moving into some development of qualities on the part of the bodhisattva that form the container foundation for the 6 paramitas. So that would be carefulness or conscientiousness, that's chapter 4. Guiding awareness, chapter 5, and that's what we'll talk a little bit about today. And then it moves into the paramitas. Patience, chapter 6. Joyful effort, chapter 7. Meditation, chapter 8. Wisdom, chapter 9. And then it concludes with dedication. So I know in some people have a difficult relationship with the idea of merit. It was very strong in the Indian and Tibetan traditions. It can be strong in some of the more other Chinese traditions, and I think in Zen we sort of downplay the idea that there is a generation of merit. But in those schools where we acknowledge that doing these practices generates merit, we get rid of ownership by giving that merit to all sentient beings. So we don't keep that merit to ourselves. As the 10 chapters are laid out, chapter 5, again, that's guarding awareness, is sort of the hinge. The first chapters are almost an expression of the ideals. So the ideals of developing bodhicitta, the desire to attain enlightenment or awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings. And then the practicality then becomes joyful effort and patience and meditation and wisdom. So the paramitas. We bridge these two things by looking at guarding awareness. The Sanskrit is apramada. What I want to hone in, though, on this talk is just one stanza out of 109. So I think chapter 5, if I remember correctly, has actually 109 stanzas. And there's one stanza that has always struck out to me. And so I'll read it. Stanza 13. To cover all the earth with sheets of leather, where could such amounts of skin be found? But with the leather soles of just my shoes, it is as though I cover all the earth. So to cover all the earth with sheets of leather, where could such amounts of skin be found? But with the leather soles of just my shoes, it is as though I cover all the earth. So this is not merely good poetry. I think it is good poetry, though. Shantideva, I think, is describing what might very well be the core of Buddhist practice in just 4 lines. In this stanza, Shantideva contrasts 2 approaches to managing suffering, which is cast as the task of protecting our feet. The first follows our natural inclination. Our natural inclination we can't escape even by just simply saying we're Buddhists. The earth represents a full range of conditions that confront us. People, bodies, noise, loss, injustice, illness, and change. Rocks and thorns are the irritations and pains that arise within these conditions. Covering the earth means trying to engineer life, how to engineer things, arranging everything so that these difficulties don't appear. Being able to arrange them just so, or waiting to act until causes and conditions are perfect. With this strategy, we attempt to eliminate discomfort by controlling external conditions, other people's behavior, environments, systems, outcomes. And we have a tendency to rebel whenever the suggestion is made that this approach won't work, that this isn't the solution, because it feels, again, very natural. But Shantideva exposes this first strategy to being ultimately futile by comparing the solution to covering the whole world with leather. It just isn't going to work. And when it's pointed out to us, it does kind of seem obvious. Like, oh yeah, that's not going to work. But we rarely recognize it when we're in the middle of trying to stretch out all that leather. The second approach is to cultivate awareness and restraint to the point of where experience actually occurs, to put leather on the soles of our feet. Leather soles means training in how these difficulties are met, and the methods are radically different. One is natural but impossible. It's our knee-jerk response. And it's impossible because conditions are endless and uncontrollable. The other is unnatural but achievable because it works at the point of contact. If you remember in the Brahmaya Sutta, where there's the record of the Buddha's awakening, after he's awakened, he says something, this is a different translation. I've struggled hard to realize this, enough with trying to explain it. Those mired in greed and hate can't really understand this teaching. It goes against the stream, subtle, deep, obscure, and very fine. Those besotted with greed cannot see, for they are shrouded in a mass of darkness. So it goes against the stream, remember. And that, I forget who it is. It's one of the Indras, one of the incarnation of Indras says, yes, but there's some people with a little dust in their eyes and you should go teach them. And then he goes and he teaches his former 5 compatriots. So I've struggled hard to realize this, enough with trying to explain it. And I think basically 25 centuries later, we're still trying to explain it. Shantideva's claim is not about external conditions being irrelevant. It's that ethical stability, maybe just sanity, our sanity can't depend on rearranging them. Or using Uchiyama Roshi's framing, which I really quite like. He doesn't concentrate, I notice in his writings, so much on the Bodhisattva part, but on the Mahasattva part. And in Japanese, that's Dairin, and that's literally the word for adult in Japanese. So for Uchiyama Roshi, Buddhism is, as they would say today, adulting. So to be an adult, being an adult can't depend on rearranging those external conditions. If our ability to be patient, kind, or restrained requires the word to improve first, then our practice will always be fragile, and it probably will always fail to some degree. Now, we do have to be careful. When Shantideva says suffering arises from the mind, he's not claiming that there's some sovereign mind or agency that is freely in control of these things. He is still firmly working within the Weltanschauung of Mahayana Buddhism. Dependent origination, cause and effect, not self, no self, all of that. So Shantideva is not saying that some self needs to get its act together and control its mind. Because if that were that way, then that would be easy too. There's no self that directs the mind stream, no inner manager who can simply decide not to react. Thoughts, emotions, and impulses arise due to causes and conditions. And this can be a little confusing because when we say causes and conditions or cause and effect, it feels very small and linear. And does that mean we're just sort of puppets? Does that mean like we can't? So how would we do anything? But it's because it's not just that there's a chain of cause and effect, but it's a loop. A causes B, which causes A, which causes B, which causes A, etc. There's actually a computer scientist and artificial intelligence researcher, Douglas Hofstadter, who claims that we are strange loops. So this is kind of why it all works, because we can influence causes and conditions, I think there's a lot of times the simile that's used that sort of like we're on the bank of a river. Sometimes there's a meditation technique that's kind of like this, like we're on a bank on a river, and the river is flowing by, and there's logs going by, or whatever the course of the river, and there's just some sort of idea that, you know, we're just going to let the river flow. I'm not going to try and intervene in the river. But Buddhism really says that we're the river. There's nobody sitting on the bank. We're the river. So there's parables about different things, but I couldn't find a good parable about this. So one afternoon a few days ago, ChatGPT and I tried to work on a parable. So this is the parable of the king who learned not to sign. So this is trying to explain, give an idea of what it is actually like. This is from some of the Buddhist teachings and also from modern neuroscience. So there was a king whose job it was to sign decrees. The kingdom was large and old, and so large and so old that long ago a system had formed. Advisors gathered information, and they argued and worried and murmured and drafted plans. And by morning, a stack of papers waited on the king's desk. And each one ended the same way, approved by the king. The king read them carefully. They were written in his language, and they used his favorite expressions. They sounded like things he would have said himself. So he signed them and thought, I decided. This is what I've decided. Approved by the king. I signed it. When asked why he acted, he always had the same answer. Well, these answers seem sensible. These decrees seem sensible. But this is kind of always after the fact. The advisors were a familiar crowd. One panicked about the future. One remembered old insults. One loved comfort and shortcuts. One cared deeply about appearances. And they would argue and interrupt each other, and sometimes they drank a little too much wine. But they knew their jobs, and they'd been running the place for a long time, since long before the king learned to read. One day the king was just plain exhausted. So instead of signing, he just sat quietly and watched the papers arrive. And the advisors still argued, and the papers still came, but nothing fell apart. And after a while, the king noticed something odd. Some papers were clearly outside of his authority, and signing them changed nothing. Others required his signature, but only after they were written. And he could refuse to sign them, but he couldn't rewrite them. So he began to do two things. For papers that were beyond his control, he stopped arguing with them. And for papers within his control, he read them slowly and signed them carefully. And some he didn't sign at all. And the kingdom grew no smaller, but the king grew lighter. And he never could really rule the advisors, but he simply learned which papers were his to sign and which were not. So this parable sort of gets at the fact that we appear to ourselves to be a self in control of things. We appear to be the author of our thoughts. We have our emotions, but it's not really the case. The conscious mind is only about 10% of our brain activity, and naturally it's the one that thinks it's in control because it's the only one we're aware of. And we are that awareness, and that's why it gets strange and loopy. But it's not impossible. So it's not a lost cause, because there is leverage, there is influence. We can add different causes and conditions back into the mix. Habits can be shaped, attention can be strengthened, reactivity can be noticed earlier. And with this approach, the leather soles do not command the ground to soften, but they change how we encounter the ground. So this isn't an attempt to cover the earth. I think we sort of see this a lot. There's a lot of different ways I think we see this. We can see this in our own lives. One is it's incredibly difficult for us to recognize in ourselves that we are not the selves we think we are, that we're locuses of cause and effect, our history, our biology. And because it's hard to recognize it in ourselves, we don't recognize it in others either. That they're not ghosts driving around in meat suits either, that in any particular instance, they are responding to causes and conditions, given the momentum that they have based on those causes and conditions. So, I mean, it's not that we can change things overnight. Just saying basically that things are causes and conditions. And you're very unlikely to wake up in the morning, unless you happen to be a doctor, knowing medicine. So, things are, again, not arbitrary, but their influence can be brought to bear on them. So, how are we to think about the Bodhisattva vow in this context, though? Because a lot of the time it really feels like we're called to do something. Buddhism begins with the sober recognition that pain is unavoidable. Bodies get sick, relationships strain, people age, plans fail, loss arrives regardless of our values and intentions. No ethical system, no spiritual practice promises a life without pain. And I would say, even worse, to some extent, Buddhism does not promise an afterlife without pain. Certainly Zen does not. Because it's a little sketchy as to whether they promise an afterlife at all. It is focused on reducing suffering in this life. So, since we cannot promise a life without pain, what is workable is suffering, the mental proliferation that arises around pain. Suffering is the stories we tell, the resistance we add, the demand that things be otherwise than they are. This distinction matters because pain left alone does not necessarily spread. It too is impermanent. But suffering almost always does, and sometimes to those around us. When suffering goes unexamined, it tends to express itself as action. We speak sharply, we withdraw care, we justify harm as honesty, necessity, exhaustion. Or the things that people say today, I'm just living my truth. It's how I feel. I'm just being authentic. Pain that isn't handled effectively can be passed on as suffering. And this is the cycle Shantideva is concerned with, that pain leads to suffering, that leads to harm, more pain and more suffering. So the Bodhisattva vow is not a promise to remove pain from the world. It's a commitment to interrupt the cycle where we can. And this is where and how we can free all beings. We can consider a common situation. Someone's overwhelmed by work, family responsibilities, health crises, or uncertainty. A small comment lands badly, and they respond harshly. And then they explain it away. I was just being honest, or I don't have the energy to be gentle right now. And the exhaustion is real, the pain is real, but we still have to ask the Buddhist question, did suffering end here, or did it move downstream? In this moment, suffering was not relieved, it was passed along, and now another person carries it and the cycle continues. Shantideva's teaching is an uncompromising attempt to break that cycle. Ending suffering does not require eliminating pain, but it requires refusing to let pain turn into harm. And this is what keeping the Bodhisattva vow looks like at the ground level. But it's only really half the picture, because the Bodhisattva path doesn't protect us from the pain caused by others, and quite the opposite. It commits us to entering situations where people are already acting out of suffering, where harsh words are spoken, where harm is done, where confusion and fear are present. And from our side, we have to work to keep pain from becoming harm. Buddhism is not for the faint of heart. From the other side, we cannot avoid being on the receiving end of harm when others fail to do so. And this is why the vow is simply not about emotional regulation or personal calm. It's about staying present with painful conditions without adding another turn of the wheel. Avoiding suffering doesn't mean avoiding difficulty. We refuse to match energy. I actually saw this in people's 2026 resolutions. They're going to spend 2026 matching the energy of other people. The Buddhist path is to do the opposite. It's not to match energy. It's try to diffuse the situation. And sometimes that looks like restraint. Sometimes that looks like speaking up. Sometimes it looks like staying when it would be easier to withdraw. And sometimes it means leaving. But it never looks like the belief that our job is to eliminate pain before we can practice. And it is practice. Pain will still arrive through bodies, relationships, and through the actions of others. And so the vow is not kept by preventing pain, but by meeting it without turning it into something more. Shantideva's message can be bitter medicine for those involved in causes. So the issue here is not whether or not and how we care about the world, injustice, or suffering, because many people are drawn to practice precisely because they care about those things deeply and they want conditions to improve. And wanting conditions to improve is not a mistake. Conditions matter. But problems arise when any ideology, religious, political, or moral, becomes a substitute for discipline at the point of contact. Ideologies are powerful. They offer us coherence. They tell us what matters, who is harmed, and what should be done. But they can become an echo chamber because all ideologies are always right from inside their frame of reference. They explain the world, they justify action, they give us a sense of standing on the right side of history. This also means they can be dangerous to practice. First, ideology easily allows us to confuse doing good with being skillful. And a person may be sincerely committed to reducing suffering in the abstract while repeatedly increasing it in ordinary day-to-day relationships. Good intentions at scale do not automatically translate into care, restraint, and patience up close. And second, ideology provides moral certainty, and moral certainty is always dangerous. It can excuse reactivity. When we are convinced we are acting for the right cause, harshness becomes necessary, impatience, urgency, and cruelty becomes telling the truth. Suffering is explained, justified, and passed along the way. Third, and most subtly, ideology can narrow compassion without announcing that it has done so. It decides in advance whose suffering counts most, whose harm is understandable, and whose pain can be postponed. Attention shifts away from the being in front of us towards categories, narratives, and outcomes. And this is not the Bodhisattva vow. It is not a vow to save the innocent, deserving, and the morally aligned. It vows to save all beings, including those who are difficult, confused, irritating, morally compromised, and just plain wrong. So we're not anti-justice. And we do want to fix conditions. But we can't replace the hard moment-to-moment work of not adding suffering. Replacing that work with this reassuring sense of being on the right side of a cause. And, speaking to possibly a possible audience, it is a myth that progressives have always been on the right side. So instead of looking at ideology, we'll look at what suffering is being added right now and by whom. And we don't worry about why. We just practice with that. Now, this is what this Indian character said. We're Zen. We're Soto Zen. What has anyone said something similar? And I think they have, but it's so the Indian tradition and then moving in the Tibetan tradition is again, in Tibetan Buddhism until you get to the highest practices, it's called Lamrim. It's literally the stages on the path, and you practice this, then you practice this, then you practice this, then you practice this. And it can be very comforting, but you can also get trapped, I think, in thinking, it's a form of Goddard's Law. So Goddard's Law says, and this just happens everywhere once you know about it, any metric that becomes a target ceases to be a good metric. So one that I'm familiar with a lot is grades. Grades kind of started out by saying, this is how you did. These days, everyone thinks they should get an A. They become an end to themselves. People write me, my students send me emails, how do I get an A? They don't write, how do I understand this? Can you explain this to me? It's like, how do I get an A? So in a lot of ways now the metric A's have become the target. And worse, now getting the degree, which used to be a metric, is now a target. And we don't need to get into that today. But this is sort of where I think the merit and the stages and the steps thing can go awry, is you get to substitute these, what originally might have been metrics, become targets. And you think, well, I haven't done that yet. I'm such a schmuck. But looking at the koans, just a couple, because I think now that when I started thinking about it, I think they actually all say the same thing. Because we already knew they all said the same thing, but I think they may in fact be saying what Shanti Davis says here. So Shanti Davis' point in stanza 13 is that suffering does not end by controlling conditions and trying to make the world safe enough, quiet enough, intelligible enough before we act as a mistake. What matters is how we meet what is already here. And so Joshu's wash your bowl. In the well-known case from the Blue Cliff Record, a monk asked Joshu, "What's the meaning of the way?" And in response, Joshu asks whether the monk has eaten. And the monk says, yes. And Joshu says, wash your bowl. So the monk is trying to step back from life in order to gain control through understanding. He wants a meaning that will secure him against confusion, and Joshu refuses to give in, refuses to give him that answer, attempt to give him that answer. He doesn't provide a teaching that will make this path safer, manageable, and he points directly to the activity already underway. So this illustrates the stanza 13. The monk wants to cover the earth. He wants to get a grasp on the way before walking it. And Joshu responds with leather soles. Deal with what's under your feet without demanding that it be softened first. And it's the same. I mean, I started going through these, and like here's Baizhang's a day without work is a day without food. Baizhang insists on working in old age, and his monks hide his tools to force him to rest. And he responds by refusing to eat. Hence, a day without work is a day without food. So here the monks are trying to manage conditions for compassion to remove hardship so suffering doesn't arise. And Baizhang refuses that form of protection. So he doesn't deny pain or difficulty. He refuses the idea that the ethical life depends on eliminating it. So he's just going to keep on keeping on. So this is echoed in stanza 13. I think there's a joke, maybe not a funny one, that all the koans are two patterns. The teacher says absolute. The student says absolute, and the teacher says, ha, relative. Or the teacher says relative, the student says relative, and the teacher says, ha, absolute. So I think maybe instead they might be substituted or summarized by there's always someone trying to control the situation, to arrange it just so, often by substituting. We don't have these words in English anymore. In fact, I went down a rabbit hole. So in German, they have wissen, to know a fact, and kennen, to have had the experience. We just have know now. So confusing wissen for kennen, so confusing understanding for experience, which is, again, another attempt to control. I've run a little bit over, but I want to get to this part because at this point, it may be helpful to widen the lens a bit. The problem Shantideva is addressing is not uniquely Buddhist. Of course, it cannot possibly be uniquely Buddhist. This is human. The ancient Stoics confronted the same human difficulty, but from a very different cultural and metaphysical background, and arrived at strikingly similar conclusions. We think of the figures like Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca. None of them spoke about bodhicitta, bodhi nature, vows to liberate all beings. They were not trying to save the world, but they were trying to live sanely and ethically in a world that refused to cooperate. The Stoic starting point is starkly practical. Some things are up to us and some things are not. Suffering arises when we confuse the two. And as Epictetus says, our job is to identify which are which. When we attempt to control what lies beyond our power, other people's behavior, political outcomes, the body's aging, the inevitability of loss, we generate distress, anger, and resentment. And when we carefully attend to what is within our power, judgment, response, and intention, life becomes at least workable. Again, can't get rid of the pain. And this isn't resignation, it's a refusal again to try to cover the earth and leather, to refuse to waste moral energy on impossibilities. So in a sense, the Stoics offer a version of Shantideva's leather soles without the Buddhist framework, and so they don't promise inner peace through world reform. They train attention, restraint, response so that one can walk across rough ground without being destroyed by it. And the Stoics are uncompromising about responsibility. The fact that circumstances are not under control does not excuse how we act within them. So we may not be agents, but we're still responsible. Anger, cruelty, and negligence are not justified by hardship. Explanation is not exoneration. And this is very close to Shantideva's insistence that suffering explains harm, but doesn't excuse it. And yeah, I'll only add at this point that sometimes this Stoic message is a little bit easier because it doesn't have any of these grand or cosmic aspirations or subtle ontologies. We're still people who live day to day with families, jobs, illnesses, politics and loss. So the Stoic approach demonstrates that we can sort of handle these things without a grand spiritual framework. Although I'm still a little partial to that grand spiritual framework. So I'm just going to conclude. It's basically all the same practical insight. It still is very difficult to put into practice. That we cannot control the world. But we're not relieved of the responsibility of how we meet it. So we should concentrate on putting on our boots. That's it. Comments? Questions? Rebuttals?
Hi.
Roshan.
So I think that's a brilliant insight that suffering spreads. And it brings to mind something that a friend of mine who's gone through 30 or 40 years of therapy told me maybe 15 years ago, that the big insight that they had in therapy was not to spread their crap around. So that's basically the same the same lesson. It's like that was, realizing that that was making things worse. Maybe they could stew in their own juices, but they shouldn't be flailing those juices about. So that's it's because people often ask, you know, what's the point of this meditation? And it's pretty clear that this is a pretty good answer. It's like we're gonna we're gonna reduce suffering by us not spreading more suffering. But on the other hand, I like the grand cosmic things, and I think if you sit for a while and you come out of retreat and you see an animal or you see a bug, there's a certain kinship that you feel after a retreat with any other life form that's usually not there because you're all scattered about. But there's something that happens, this kinship arises, and you're less likely to smash a bug or or chase away a deer from my yard or whatever afterwards because of this kinship. So I think that's when, say, arise bodhicitta for the benefit of all beings. There's a kinship with all beings that arises. So we're being told by people who are wiser than us, there is this kinship. We may not know about it for a very long time, and we may only see glimpses of it any time, but there's a connection there with others. So thank you. That was a really good talk. I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I would put, I mean, obviously we've sat a lot together, so I completely agree with you. But I think, but it also, I think there are the times you use the example of squashing a bug. It's even not just squashing the bug. It's that point where you are like the Dalai Lama says, mosquitoes spread disease. So it's even a difference between reflexively squashing the bug, almost because you can, and knowing it's like this is kind of dangerous. This bug, this tick, is going to give someone Lyme disease. And then also, then at that point, a sort of, and the Japanese have a lot of nice words for this, but it's that sort of melancholy that you wish you didn't, you wish you didn't need to do it, or something like that. Like, yeah, I don't know.
Wistful.
Yeah, there's a sort of, yeah, like, I don't know what the lifespan of a tick is, but it was out doing its tick
Well,
things. And
I am trapping mice in my garage.
are
And the
you
reason I'm trapping them in the garage is so they don't get in the house because it's a gateway to the house.
right? But it's hard. So I mean, as I know at Hokyoji, there is, and this is the knee jerk thing, and I don't want to discount that. I mean, all things being considered, maybe I would prefer maybe some knee jerk compassion to none at all. But people like, I'm gonna trap the mouse and I'm gonna take it a mile away and release it. You've killed that mouse. Like that mouse is just assuredly dead as if you had caught it in a trap. because, you know, it was part probably of a mouse family and it had its territory and its hole in the ground. And it's like, how is he going to dig a hole overnight? And so some things feel very good in the moment. There's a horrible, horrible. I'm just not even going to say it. I'm not going to. I'm not going to. There's a joke about that, and I'm not going to go into it. Anyone else? I was talking to probably when we shouldn't have been. Almost certainly we shouldn't have been. I can't even know why we were not in Zazen. But for whatever reason, it might have been after the end of Dokusan. Long time ago in Great Sky Session, I was talking to a teacher. And sorry for the spicy language. We came to the conclusion that Buddhism was basically just trying to be less of an asshole. And that if each year you weren't less of an asshole, that you might need to look into your practice a little bit.
Well, yeah, Brad Warner's one of his first books was "Don't Be a Jerk."
Don't be a jerk. That's another way of putting it. It was not Brad Warner.
Jushin, thanks so much for your talk. They're always very complicated. I think. Many layers. But so I struggle with this. Maybe it's being a woman, maybe it's my generation, maybe it's my role in my family, or with others. I don't know, but it was, recently the holidays. So I had an experience where you listen to someone 99 times being a certain way, and it impacts you in a certain way, and you kind of try to let it go. And then that 100th time, the person says something, pardon me, you just can't let it go. Yeah. And you hope that you can say something back that would actually invite some conversation, some reciprocity, or some, understanding what you say impacts me, what I say impacts you. And then it goes completely awry. You drive everyone but you and the person that you're talking to from the table. And then I'm thinking afterwards, well, it's not going to work ever. Like, give this up. I mean, I really care about this person, but it's not going to happen. And, I'm taking responsibility too for my, maybe was it landed maybe with some difficulty. And so I'm ending up re-explaining myself and whatever. So this is just normal. This is normal human interaction. But what I guess my desire is to try to make good connection, but it goes awry, and it's a different um, it was a different action this time. 99 times I quiet. 100th time I try something different. Did it work at all? Not really. So I'll go back to just 99 more times, trying to let it go, being quiet, whatever. That's not spreading. I'm like Rushin said, wow, I from my response, am I spreading more suffering and pain? And I mean, not really. It wasn't that it wasn't that bad. And it, but I was sort of by somewhat challenging this individual. So there is a question in there from what I just said. But those are really, I think that's a very real human dilemma that I'm sure everybody on the screen has experienced, right? With another person. So I was also very kind of impacted, by the, did the suffering end here? Or, and then again, what do you just let people just go on and then avoid them and not try to make good connection? And you know what I'm saying? Do you just let it go and let it go and let it go and let it go? I don't know. Does that make any sense to anybody?
Absolutely. Absolutely makes sense. Absolutely. First, not perfect about that at all. It's one of those things, well, I know what I should do. I think the second thing is not we have a lot of different causes and conditions, biology, history, and those kinds of things. And so I don't even know that that just solving for suffering will solve for our inflicting harm on other people or not. Or being, taken wrong or that sort of thing. So, I don't, we also don't want to oversimplify it. But looking at the thing first, I mean, I guess the question is, in any of our experience, has that ever worked? Like, have you ever changed somebody's mind about something? And in my experience, mostly not. So my father and I talk on the phone and things edge into uncomfortable territory. And I'm like, how are your tomatoes doing? How's your garden doing? How are you doing? How do you feel? Rather than getting trapped in arguing about these grand, again, ideologies, getting back to the nuts and bolts and say, well, I can make a connection with this person based on this, based on very concrete things. How did you like the meal? It's like, were those potatoes undercooked, overcooked? Were they just, good? I think you also sometimes, it's not about that person. You're going to change that person's mind, but maybe it's the other people around them and you who you sort of need to not virtue, you don't want a virtue signal, but it's like, sort of indicate like, okay, well, this isn't right. That isn't. If you if you do feel like there is a situation, I don't find people are often persuaded by logical argument, but there's sort of the Socratic. So the Socratic method is to concentrate more on what the person said and to get them think and reason about what they said and what the implications are, and to get them to realize that there are implications for what they said that they would be uncomfortable with. And so and sorry, Dad. I do sometimes do that with my dad. He's very unlikely to watch this video, but I do sometimes do that with my dad, where it's like, well, what about this, this, and this? It's like this isn't something you actually believe because, for these reasons, or this would lead to some sort of conclusion that I know you don't agree with. So the Socratic method is basically taking your own ego out of it and saying, I don't need to get this person to agree with me. I want to show this person what the implications of what they just said implications are. So, you just kind of, I always forget what they are, but the right speech sort of list is like, is the person ready to hear? Is this true? Is the person ready to hear it? Will I actually help them by saying it? And, I think if you're able to do the right thing 99 times out of 100, you're doing really well. That's really good. I don't know that I score 99 out of 100 on that. But there are layers. There are layers to it, depending on it's like But then again, it's stepping out of the reactivity and saying, "Oh, okay, let me try this approach," which might be, "Let me connect with this person on something I know we have common ground on," or let me see if I can sort of show this person in a non-patronizing way that they may not even really believe what they said.
Yeah. There was an article in the Washington Post on that area, and what they basically said was, and I took it and wanted to use it this last holiday season because I have a son who can be argumentative. But instead of arguing with him, you just say, "Oh, I hear what you're saying. How would that work?"
Yeah.
And let them think about what they just said and try to convince you. And then maybe in the process they realize maybe it doesn't work, and that's the idea. Yeah. It's kind of along lines what you were saying.
Yeah. I think one of the things and this, our theories and imagination and things and ideologies very often don't sufficiently touch reality to be falsified. And so they're just easy to have and hold. And the other problem is that for any set of facts will support a lot of different theories, depending on how you tell the story. And so, so if you start grounding it back into things, into the practical, into people's own lives. It's especially so where I live is very rural, we're just out of time. I'll stop here. And there is this apparent tension from the fact that people are just super conservative. But they will give you the shirt off your back to help you out. A lot of the time. I mean, there's some grifters, but there always are. But, by and large, they're all very good people. And you go like, wow, how can good people believe these things? And I think it's because those beliefs aren't in a position to get falsified. A lot of times because they're about things over there. All right. Let me see here. We have to remove the pins. And I want to thank everyone for coming this morning. Although, where's my... And yeah, it's an exciting new year for Hokyoji, although kind of our practice year is ending. Our practice year kind of ends with the winter retreat, starts up again after the mud season in April. Will be holding for January, February, and March. Zen and the Roman Emperor will be going over Marcus Aurelius and some of these Stoic ideas, journaling, intersection with Zen. It is a men's reading group, but what I've talked about doing is recording the sort of lecture part, and we'll put that in a playlist on our YouTube channel so that everybody could see that part, and then we'll not have the actual discussion part in there. But I've been wanting to do a men's group for a time, and so hopefully this is the inaugural thing. So if you're interested, please sign up. It's the second and fourth Wednesdays, except we have the winter practice period. And then it'll be just 2 weeks this year. Let me get the weeks right. February 2nd through the 8th will be Associate Teacher G.D. Kennedy. And the second week, which will be a session, is February 9th through the 15th, which I will lead. And the theme this year is the roots of goodness, which is related to the topic today. This is Dogen's fascicle from the Shobogenzo on, I forget the exact, the qualities of a great person. The first week is online. So it's hybrid if you just want to sign up. And we've arranged it this year so the discussions are at night so that people can attend after work. I don't know who here among us is still left working, but so that's that. Next week, I'm super excited to say our speaker will be Tonin O'Connor, who is a long time teacher and friend of mine from the Great Sky Days, and she officiated my husband and I's wedding. So next Sunday will be the speaker. And then just sort of we're changing our communication strategy a little bit. Normally we have a monthly news email. Now the first month of a quarter, January, April, whatever, we're going to have a newsletter that gets more into, stories and things going on at Hokyoji, not just here's this retreat, here's that retreat. So that will all be out next week. So everyone have a great day. And let's close with the Bodhisattva vow. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Thank you everyone for coming, and Happy New Year. And everyone have a great Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.